Welcome to our Kung Fu Foundations program for the summer. This is our second round on this, and we're starting right at the base of footwork. So last week we were talking about one of the more difficult things I find to translate to people is the ability to pivot and shift on one foot and create circles and changes. So we were looking at the different pivots last week, and we're going to start to incorporate a little bit of movement, a little bit of back and forth, and continue off of that concept, as well as starting to add in some others as well. So let's get ourselves warmed up a little bit here. We'll just let the head rise and fall. And looking from side to side. And we'll go ear to one shoulder and the other. Again to the first side and the second. Let the head roll. Do some half circles. And then keeping the jaw closed, take the chin up and around. And then the other way. Okay, shoulders are going to go back. And shoulders are going to go forward. Arms can circle one way. And the other. We're going to reach and lean to one side. And to the other. Again to the first side. And the second. Let those arms go loose. Wrap around the body a little bit, warming up your trunk. And then we're going to cradle the arm across in the front on one side. And on the other. And then over the head on one arm. And on the other. And then behind the back on one side. And on the other. Okay, warming up the hips. Let those hips roll around one way. And around the other. One more time, the first way. And the second. Knees from the inside to the outside. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. From the outside to the inside. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And over to your shoulders. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Up to the chest. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hands behind the head. Let's do some crosses. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And shake it out a little. Let's turn. We'll stretch down. We'll lunge to one side. And we'll turn and we'll lunge to the other. Feet can face forward and we'll lunge to one side. And to the other. One more time to the first side. And the second. And then hands on the ground. We'll walk over to one leg and stretch. And over to the other. Back to the first side. And to the second. Good. We're going to push out on the knees and stretch down, rocking the hips a little from side to side. And then hands on the floor and try to walk your feet in and rolling up from the ground. Okay, so last week we were focusing on pivots. And pivots are pretty tricky things to do. So what we're going to do, pardon me, is we're going to start out again with a lead position. And one of the things we're talking about with keeping our stance without changing the lead foot and being able to move and shift. So we've got a range of motion in a open fighting position. We've got a range of motion where it can be setting back into the back leg and where we can be biasing up to the front leg. These are going to be a matter of pushes and catches, as I tend to call them. The idea that if I push with my front leg and I'm willing to accept the mass into the back leg as I push. If I push and I don't accept the mass, I'm just going to pop upwards. It's not what I'm interested in doing. I'm interested in pushing that mass into one leg so that I can then push that mass back again. So for a second, just think about push, catch. There's little drills. This is the foundations of being able to keep your head in motion without necessarily changing where your feet are. So you'll notice if I bias into my back leg, my wall hanging shows up over my left shoulder. As I bias and shift into my front leg, especially if I kind of turn and get some waist in there, now that hanging is showing up on the other. So I don't want to spend my time always in the center. I want to have this ability to kind of shift that. Now, in terms of strength, a good thing we can start to do is think of dips and troughs a little bit, shifting and pushing, because this is going to help to strengthen those legs. Same if we go the other foot forward. So if we get into our front leg, we want to think about our head being off that center line. So we're using the blue wall hanging as our center. As I shift into the back, here's another position where that wall hanging is over my shoulders. So I'm shifting that. So I'm moving that over my shoulder as opposed to staying here and kind of wobbling my head from side to side. Now, anything to do with creating force from the ground is going to be a matter of thrust. The thrust principle is this idea of pushing and expressing power against the immovable, the floor, the ground, and translating that reflected force through the kinetic chains into my torso and body. So much of what we do in Kung Fu and in any good fighting system is playing with that idea of being able to create thrust and then through rotations and openings and closings of the joints, turn that thrust into different types of force, whether that's pushing, pulling, striking, rending, all those different things that we can do. So let's get ourselves going though with just a little bit of maintaining lead leg. And we're talking about that ability, like we see a lot in Xing Yi, where we kind of settle into the 60-40 so we can lighten that front leg and thrust from the back leg. And then we want to immediately kind of catch up. So we're pushing, we're catching up, we're pushing, we're catching up. Now, this is a pretty glute heavy exercise when you're pushing. So what I want you to think about is being able to fire this chain from glutes into hamstrings and quads, through the knee, through the calf, through the rolling on the ball of the foot and out to the ball of the foot and the toes. So we're driving from the ground. We don't have to move far. We want to be able to slide, to push. So let's work that just going forwards for a second. You can work either leg back. This is our basic Xing Yi. If you want to start to use, if you know Xing Yi's work and you want to start to use things, like palms as you press or wood fist and things of that sort. But it's a good one sometimes just to think about the idea of moving mass. We were talking about this last week. Imagine, there's a big block of concrete in front of you and you have to push that concrete forward by taking the space the concrete was in, not by pushing and leaning outside of your base, but by pushing and your base moves to that space where that concrete block was. So we're pushing it out of the way. We're pushing it from behind. The more you start to settle into that back leg, the greater the thrust you can get. Now, in terms of speed and pressing somebody, we can't take too long. We can't sit back and say, hold on a second, I'm just aligning things. I'm about to push you. We want to have this fairly instant. As soon as we want to, we're releasing the weight of that front leg. So sometimes even just thinking about picking that front leg up for a second and not necessarily falling. So I don't want to pick it up and feel like I'm going to fall forward. I want to pick it up in a way that I can glide and shift and move inwards. Okay, so the opposite to that is going to be, how do I use thrust to back up? So in this case, I'm thrusting with my back leg and I'm gliding, I was thrusting with my front leg and gliding with my back leg. I'm pushing out of that. So if you want to go back to the imagined mass again, you can imagine you've got sort of a rope attached to something, where you've grabbed something heavy and you're going to tug it into your space. You're going to tug that into your space, but you're going to use that front leg to create the force for tugging, to create the force for tugging something in, tugging something to you. Let's do a couple more on each leg. So we're driving. Now we don't want to go up. Anytime we go up, we tend to unroot ourselves. So even if we're not going down, we want to think about lowering our mass at the same time we thrust the ground. We lower the mass, we thrust against the ground. We lower the mass, we're thrusting, we're pushing against the ground, we're tugging something into our space. Now, we were talking last week that one of the hard things to do is to maintain that good foot positioning, because there's going to be a desire when we start to move quite often to get narrow in multiple planes. We'll start to narrow our width. We'll start to narrow our depth. One of the hardest things I find teaching the Xingyi stepping pattern is that every time the person moves, that back leg gets closer and closer until they're starting to cross their feet over with one another. And we don't have much depth to our stance once we get there, and we start getting narrower and narrower. So we want to have a default where landing is this constant, it's continue. I was trying to find the word for it. It wants to be consistently in that same width and depth. This is our default. As soon as we think about getting stability, we default to a position here, and we want to be able to maintain that position as we adjust, as we move, as things start to change around us. We don't want this to disappear. We want this width and depth available, and we want this concept of being able to exchange mass to one leg in order to create thrust against the ground. So we've been talking about going forwards, 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 or backwards, backwards, backwards. But what happens if we want to be able to do a little bit of both? So maybe we want to go forwards, backwards, forwards, backwards. So you're going into that space, you're moving back out of that space. Thrust to get in, catch. That catch becomes thrust, the thrust becomes catch, the catch becomes thrust. And anytime I stop, I want to have that concept. I'm standing on the corners of a rectangle. So I don't want to lose the rectangle. I don't want the rectangle to narrow. I don't want it to come in to the point where it's narrow front and back or side to side, because stability is connected to the width and depth of your stance. Now there's trade-offs. Wider and deeper you go, less mobility. So sometimes we want that mobility, so we have to come up narrower. And sometimes we want that stability, so we have to widen and settle a little bit. Okay, so let's jump that into the pivots we were working on last week, because everything else comes off of this stable platform. If I've got a stable platform, if I can move and I can shift. I've got that stable platform. Now we're going to talk about shifting and altering that a little bit, but let's do some review from last week. So last week we were fixing one point as our pivot point, and we're using the opposite leg to thrust and change. So we're pushing, and then we're changing our hip position, but we're keeping. So we're going to keep the lead leg where it is, and we want to do, let's do back to our quarter turns. Boom, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is quarter turn with that back foot. Now, quite often when people go to turn by moving their back foot, they will tend to cross their feet over. And that happens a lot in Kung Fu, but usually as a transition to something else, and also as a strengthening tool. So here, for today, what I want you to do is just think about keeping the shape and using that one central pivot, the ball of the foot, as we come around. Now, what you're going to want to avoid is throwing mass forward to get the weight off of the back foot. We want to sink in. We want to kick off the back foot and pivot on the front. Kick off. So I'm using that back foot as my thrust a little bit. I'm pushing off of it. I'm pushing off of it. Let's try that with the other foot forward. So this is where we're rotating with the back foot coming around us, and we're pointing 15 minutes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do that again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so switching up feet. The second thing we were looking at last week was, okay, I can pivot by sweeping that foot behind me. Can I also pivot by taking the back foot forwards to pivot? Yes, I can. Easy answer. So now we're going to push off the back foot, pivot. 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's try that with the other foot forward. So last time, we were talking last week about I'm moving towards my back. That was the first exercise. Now I'm moving towards my chest, second exercise. So I'm turning in the direction of my chest and belly. 2, 3, 4. Self-analyze. Am I in a good position? Could I still have that ability to shift and move? And again, heading towards the chest. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so let's go back to first foot forward again. So we're still pivoting on our front foot. Our front foot is our base. We're pivoting on that. Now, what I want to be able to do now is I want to go out and back. So I'm going to go pivot, return. Pivot, return. Pivot, return. Let's do a couple more. 1 and back. 2 and back. 3 and back. 4 and back. Now this is where it starts to get hard. You don't want to start kicking that leg around behind you. You want to take this shape, 50, you want to go quarter turn, back where you started. Quarter turn, back where you started. Quarter turn, and back. Let's change feet. So we'll go to our back and back to our front again. To the back, to the front again. To the back, to the front. Got a couple, 1 and 2. Are you still in a position where you're mobile? Good. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. Okay, give your legs a little bit of a break. So what else did we do last week? We talked about changing that pivot point to the back leg. So when we change a pivot point to the back leg, if we're moving our front leg, we can step out for quarter turns. So I'm going to take that front leg, I'm going to pivot. We talked about the concept of athletic potential, that when we turn, we need to be in a position where we could issue or receive force. So as we pivot on that back leg, 1, receive or issue. 2, receive or issue. 3, step that around. Am I in a good position? 4, am I in a good position? Let's do that circuit one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4. Could I pull the mass? Could I push the mass? Could something heavy impact me? Could I deliver impact? Let's put the other foot forward. So we were moving. In this case, we were moving around by opening with the front foot. So let's go to the same over here. Front foot's going to step around. We're going to move over here. Could we catch? Could we push? We're going to step across, catch, push, step. Am I in a good position? Step. Am I in a good position? Step. Am I in a good position? One more rotation. 1, 2, 3. Good. Okay, back to the first foot forward. So we are talking about pivoting, sorry, on the back foot, stepping across with the front and opening. Now let's go step across. 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, 1, potential, 2, potential, 3, potential, 4. Other foot forward. 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's do like we did with the front foot, back and forth. So let's say we're going to go open to the front, back to where we started. Or we go across in the front and back to where we started. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. One more time. 1, 2, 3, back. Let's try it the other leg. So we're pivoting on the back. We open, we come back. We close, we come back. One side, return. Other side, return. One side, return. Other side, return. Okay, so we've established those 2 pivot points. Either the front leg or the back leg, either going, one direction or the other. You could call it clockwise, counterclockwise, open side, closed side, whatever, chest, back, whatever kind of works for you to figure that out so you're able to shift. Now, what happens if we can start to transfer between those points? So let's try a bit of a tricky drill here. So I'm going to go back leg is going to move, front leg is the pivot. I'm going to open towards my chest. Boom. Now what I'm going to do, so that was a lead leg pivot. 1. Now I'm going to do a rear leg pivot to come back. 1, 2. Oh, now I'm traveling a little. 1, 2. Again, I just want to keep being able to default to finding that position of athletic potential where I could catch, I could push, I could catch, I could push, I could receive force, I could issue force. I could receive mass, boom, I could issue mass. So let's go back to that again. So we're going from here, lead leg pivot, boom, rear leg pivot, boom. Lead leg pivot, boom, rear leg pivot. Now I can hear you all saying, but you could do lead leg pivots in the other direction too. Yeah, so I could go lead leg pivot, let me keep that foot in, lead leg pivot, and then I could come back with a rear leg. I could go lead leg pivot, rear leg pivot, so I'm moving. So now we've got this idea that we can keep kind of shifting and moving around those pivot points. And what we want to do is consistently find. You'll sometimes see, and it's important, that just because you've turned, you're not in a fixed position. You want to find that nice, comfortable place, that nice athletic stability. So if you pivot and you feel like, oh no, I've got a little too narrow, That's okay. Shift that up, open that up. It's better to know what feels correct or more effective than to stick a position. You're not trying to stick a position. You're trying to keep a concept of dynamic stability, moving, changing, not throwing my balance around from my torso, but pivoting around those points while uh, changing angles, while shifting, while being able to accept and issue force. So for a second longer, think about just playing around with that. I pivot on my back foot for one. Maybe I come back on that foot. Maybe I pivot on my front foot. I come back on that. I work on my back foot. I work on my front foot again, my front foot again. So I'm getting used to shifting. Now, I could also think about exchanging my lead, but pivoting. So I'm shifting, I'm moving, I'm changing up where I am. Hopefully that's making some sense for you, because we'll go into one last piece of this today. And I know this feels like, where's all the gung fu? I should be doing all sorts of beautiful things. Stability, mobility, ability to capture and issue force. It's foundational to all martial arts. So let's now talk about the two things we've done today and how do we blend those together. So what did we talk about? We talked about pushing out of the front leg to move backwards, pushing out of the back leg to move forwards. And we talked about pivoting on the front leg, and we talked about pivoting on the back leg. Can we mesh those two things together? So our first drill is going to be this. We're going to shuffle forward, boom, and then we're going to do a quarter turn. Shuffle, quarter turn. Shuffle, quarter turn. Shuffle, quarter turn. Shuffle, quarter turn. So I'm doing all that off my lead leg for right now. So I'm changing up my lead, I'm pushing, and then I'm pivoting. And in this case, I'm pivoting by moving my back leg towards, around to my back. So I pivot towards my back. Shuffle, pivot, shuffle, pivot. And what does this start to introduce us to? It introduces the idea the other person's not staying stationary. That things are, I can't just keep coming forward if that person's disappearing to the other side, but I'm kind of like a battle tank. Don't. Oh, over there. I'm going to bring this around. So, wait a second, they're over here. I'm moving toward, they're over here. And I don't want to lose all that stability I've been working on. So we can do that heading into the back leg. Maybe I can work my balance and structure till I go shuffle back, pivot on the back leg, shuffle back, pivot on the back leg. 1, pivot, 2, pivot, 3, pivot, 4, pivot. Could you receive force? Could you issue force? Other foot forward. And we'll just finish off here today. So we're shuffling back, and then we're pivoting on that back leg. Now, we now know that I could shuffle back and open one direction. I could shuffle back and step across the other way because we were doing our 1, 2, 3 shifts. But now we're adding a little bit of dynamic. I'm moving and pivoting. I'm moving and I'm pivoting. I'm moving into that back leg. I'm pivoting on that back leg. Now, as you get going with this, I'm breaking it down as move, then pivot. As you start to become more comfortable, what I want you to think about is moving and pivoting simultaneously. I'm going to thrust, land, and pivot. I'm going to thrust, land, and pivot. Gets to be a little more difficult when you do that. So start with the 2 phase. Start with the idea, I've moved in, I change angles. I've moved back, I've changed angles. As you get going, move back, change angles. Move in, change angles. And we don't always have to go for the quarter turns. Remember last week we were doing our 5-minute kind of increments. As we moved around the clock, you can use all of that. So let's come back to that next week. It's a lot of work on the legs, but it's going to make everything else. As we start to get into, difficult things where we're stepping and learning how to pivot into horse rider stance. We see that in our Mahjong a lot, step, pivot here, shift, step, pivot there. There's a lot of this that will integrate into your forms. And if you can learn how to maintain that dynamic potential in terms of that athletic potential, that will translate into your forms too. Your forms shouldn't be about posturing. They should be about functional positioning. Now, yes, there are classical movements that are designed for range of motion and challenge, but it's always going to be based on dynamic stability. All right. Thanks for training today. We'll talk to you all very soon. Go ahead.